Good afternoon. Today's public hearing is hereby called back to order, and the time is now 2:00 p.m. Chamorro Standard Time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today in this public hearing on Bill number 184-38, which is an act to amend Section 14.101 to add a new Section 14.104.2F and to amend Section 14.105, all of Article 14.1, Chapter 1, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, relative to strengthening Homeland Security services for the people of Guam by requiring merit-based grants management and fusion center director positions and requiring the submission of project performance compliance and financial reports. Again, today is Wednesday, December 17th, and again, as I mentioned earlier, we are on the record and in accordance with the open government law. Notices for today's public hearing were sent on December 9th, 2025, and again on December 13th, 2025. Notices for this hearing were also published on the Guam Legislature website and the Guam Public Notices website. Joining us here this afternoon for this public hearing is Senator Chris Duenas, and this is Masi Chris, Senator Duenas, for joining us today. And based on guidance received by the Legislative Council and the Committee on Rules, the committee scheduled this second public hearing on Bill 184 in order to discuss proposed committee amendments, which were prepared based on feedback provided during the bill's initial public hearing back on October 14, 2025. These proposed changes were discussed during a planned markup meeting on October 28, 2025, which included myself, Vice Speaker and Senator Tony Atta, and Public Safety Committee Vice Chair, and Finance Committee Chair Senator Chris Duenas. I want to thank the Chief of Police, Stephen Ignacio, for allowing me to include a brief discussion on Bill 184, including draft committee amendments during our meeting on November 6, 2025 at GPD's Hoggett Precinct. A copy of both the introduced and draft amended versions of Bill 184 were included in our public hearing notices. A copy of the introduced and draft amended versions of Bill 184 and all written testimonies that were submitted for its first public hearing on October 14, 2025 are available for review by my colleagues here in the Guam Legislature. For the record, the committee invited Chief Stephen Ignacio of the Guam Police Department to attend and participate in this afternoon's public hearing. I will now provide brief opening remarks as the author for Bill number 184-38 COR. Well, Bill 184-38 stands as a policy that I believe has morphed into a pragmatic policy for 2026 and beyond. Our Guam Fusion Center should be that central hub to collect, analyze, and disseminate information and intelligence between all levels of government here, support for the local and federal law enforcement teams that keep each and every one of us safe. Safe both inside the fence and out, safe from in our villages to the prison in Manilao, to just beyond any of the federal installations here, to just inside and outside of Guam's exclusive economic zone, some 48,000 miles around our waters here in the Western Pacific. Has that happened? Why this pragmatic policy is more practical than theoretical. Fusion centers play an important role in managing intelligence, investigation, incident information, while normally existing outside of the National Incident Management System Command and coordination structure during blue sky, as our law enforcement community calls the steady state. Information management hubs like our Guam Fusion Center must be an extension of the NIMS command and coordination system during gray sky. An example of this is the well-publicized Volt Typhoon intrusion, way before Typhoon Mawar struck in 2023, not after the cyber attacks. Our team should have leaned forward so that our critical infrastructure would not be compromised. And there is still the after effects being felt even today from Volt Typhoon. For the benefit of my colleagues and those following today's discussion on Bill 184, the draft amendments to Bill 184 require that in addition to providing the Guam Legislature and the Office of Public Accountability with copies of federal reports, a copy of all reports from federal awarding agencies received by the Office of Homeland Security relating to identified or alleged violations of law, regulation of the terms and conditions of a federal award, and corresponding corrective action plans shall also be provided. Prior to submitting the required reports, the Office of Homeland Security must redact sensitive national security information consistent with applicable federal government policy. This really is a pragmatic process. The draft of Bill 184 as amended proposes to transfer jurisdiction of the Marianas Regional Fusion Center from the Office of Homeland Security to the Guam Police Department. The MRFC may be situated within OHS facilities with federal funding support made available through OHS. The MRFC shall be managed by a program director or equivalent position in the classified service who shall be selected by the Chief of Police. Pragmatic, dealing with things realistically. Law enforcement actions always start and end in the U.S. territory with the Guam Police Department. A new Section 5 was added to ensure that 5 GCA Section 14.106, relative to the Division of Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Security, is also amended to ensure consistency with respect to removing OHS authority of the MRFC. A line must be drawn to ensure LE teams, that is law enforcement teams, are staying in their respective law enforcement lanes. No blurred lines, straightforward and consistent with the reality seen on the streets of Guam. And before we begin with testimonies, those who have signed in to provide verbal testimony on Bill number 184-38 COR, including draft committee amendments, are asked to please state your name for the record, the name of the organization or agency if their testimony is provided on behalf of the entity, and whether they support or oppose the bill. Thank you so much for being with us today. So based on the signing sheet we have so far, we have Rudy Gaza from the Marianas Regional Fusion Center, who will be providing testimony, and Lucia Perez, who is also here on behalf of the Office of Homeland Security and the Office of Civil Defense. And at this time, if I can, I'll go ahead and we'll go ladies first, if we can. And we'll start with Lucia Perez to provide your testimony. And again, Lucy, welcome back to the People's House, and you can begin.
Thank you. Hafaday Honorable Chairperson Gumataotao and members of the committee, and also Honorable Senator Chris Duenas. My name is Lucia Perez, and I am currently employed with the Guam Office of Homeland Security, Office of Civil Defense. I respectfully submit this testimony in opposition to Bill number 184-38 COR. Before you, you should have two documents. I will give you the executive summary, which I will read out, and the second document is the in-depth analysis that I took, as it currently is drafted and amended. The bill suggests placing the Marianas Regional Fusion Center, MRFC, under the jurisdiction and command of the Guam Police Department. I believe transferring MRFC into a law enforcement chain of command is unnecessary and could harm its mission. The public auditor's audit states that, open quote, non-compliance issues were caused by the lack of consistent GHS-OCD leadership and a qualified physical and grants management team, close quote. However, neither the audit nor the reference Office of Inspector General report recommends that the grants manager or program manager positions be classified. As quoted in the audit, the Office of Inspector General's recommendation direct FEMA to, open quote, require GHS-OCD to work with DOA to develop and update policies, procedures, and controls to ensure timely submission of the financial and progress reports required by the grant. It also instructed GHS-OCD to obtain training for staff on grant reporting and communicate the report deadline to all relevant employees. Also, to enforce the submission of requirements and provide technical assistance to facilitate the timely report submissions. None of these recommendations call for changes to employee classification. While the audit references gubernatorial transition reports from many years ago, those documents are historical in nature and do not constitute audit findings or recommendations of the public auditor or the Office of Inspector General. The audit does not state that classified status would have prevented the non-compliance identified. Recent incidents involving alleged unauthorized overtime and misuse of federal funds involve employees who are already classified employees, demonstrating that classification alone does not ensure compliance. At the same time, classified service protections can limit the ability to take timely corrective action, underscoring the root causes identified in the audit as it relates to policies, controls, training, and enforcement, not classification status. For these reasons, we respectfully oppose statutory mandates to classify these positions and remain committed to implementing the audit's recommendation as it's written. Concerns with the proposed change: the bill would amend Guam law so that the MRFC operates under the direction of the Chief of Police and is managed by a program director selected by the Chief of Police. Although the bill reiterates MRFC's multi-sector mission, including criminal intelligence, cybersecurity, CBRN hazards, and coordination with first responders and private partners, placing the center wholly under a law enforcement agency risks narrowing its scope and undermining its collaborative design. Fusion centers in a national context are hosted by law enforcement agencies, but federal guidance and independent studies highlight that there is no single required model. Fusion centers are meant to serve as hubs for information sharing and analysis, not investigative command posts. Their success relies on a multidisciplinary participation, representative governance, and strong protections for privacy and civil liberties. National strategy documents and guidance for the Bureau of Justice Assistance highlight that fusion centers must first receive and analyze threat and risk information. Second, disseminate timely products to appropriate partners. Third, facilitate collaboration across law enforcement, public safety, public health, and critical infrastructures. And fourth, maintain rigorous privacy and civil liberties safeguards. This role is fundamentally different from the operational command structure of a police department. Risk of placing MRFC under GPD. The first one that I found would be perception and participation. Non-law enforcement partners may hesitate to share information if the MRFC is perceived primarily as a policing entity, reducing situational awareness and weakening trust. We have a theme in the Fusion Center that we always put out. If you see something, you say something. So if individuals that have information feel like we are acting as a police, that may hinder them from wanting to say something out of fear. And then there's the mission balance. MRFC's responsibilities extend beyond criminal intelligence to include cybersecurity, CBRN hazards, and private sector coordination. These functions alone more naturally with a Homeland Security and Emergency Management framework. The third will be our privacy and civil liberties governance. Fusion centers require oversight structures that prioritize analytic integrity and civil liberties. A law enforcement chain of command, while effective for investigations, is not designed for the broader governance needs of a fusion center. The Department of Homeland Security has described Guam's MRFC as uniquely structured to empower law enforcement, public safety, fire service, emergency response, public health, critical infrastructure, and private sector partners. MRFC's published privacy and civil liberties policy further underscores its mission to protect the public's trust and governmental legitimacy. These sources confirm that the MRFC's effectiveness depends on remaining a trusted, multidisciplinary hub, not a unit operating under a single law enforcement command. For these reasons, I respectfully oppose Bill number 184-38 COR as drafted. I urge the committee to consider that MRFC remains a whole-of-government, multidisciplinary fusion center, aligned with national guidance and Guam's established mission. Thank you for the opportunity to present.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Now we'll switch over to Rudy Gaza. Rudy, you can proceed. Thank you again.
Thank you. My name is Rudy Gaza, and I'm with the Mariana Regional Fusion Center. Good afternoon, Senator Gumataotao, Senator Duenas, and I'll proceed with my testimony. Thank you for the opportunity to address Bill 184-38 and its proposed changes to the governance of the Mariana Regional Fusion Center. GHS-OCD supports accountability, transparency, and compliance with all federal grant and reporting requirements. However, Bill 184-38 introduces structural changes that would create significant operational, legal, funding risk for Guam's federally recognized fusion center. First, the bill proposes to classify the MRC director position. While classification may be appropriate for fiscal or grants management functions, the MRFC director is an executive intelligence leadership position that requires federal trust, immediate clearance, and the ability to be replaced without delay if federal confidence is lost. A classified employee is protected by civil service, CSC, the Department of Labor, processes. If a classified director fails to obtain or maintain required federal clearances, the government cannot act immediately. The delay places Guam at risk of losing federal fusion center recognition. Second, the bill transfers MRFC under the jurisdiction of the Guam Police Department. Fusion centers are all hazards, all threats, multidisciplinary intelligence centers designed to integrate law enforcement, emergency management, public health, infrastructure protection, and federal partners. Placing the MRFC under GPD risks narrowing the mission and discouraging non-law enforcement participation, which is inconsistent with the National Fusion Center mission. Third, if the director is classified, that individual would still report to the chief of police, who maintains an appointed official serving at the pleasure of the governor. The structure does not remove executive influence. It simply inserts a classified position beneath an appointed authority while reducing the governor's ability to act quickly to preserve federal compliance. Finally, the bill weakens funding stability. Under GHS-OCD, Fusion Center projects are embedded directly in Guam Homeland Security's grant program application and align with statewide risk priorities. If the MRC is moved to GPD, funding becomes indirect and competitive, subject to prioritization decisions outside the Fusion Center's control. This increases the risk of reduced or lost sustainment funding. In summary, Bill 184-38 does not address the root causes identified in the OPA audit. Instead, it introduces new risks related to personnel law, clearance eligibility, federal compliance, and funding continuity. For these reasons, GHS-OCD MRFC respectfully opposes Bill 184-38 and recommends maintaining the MRFC under GHS-OCD with an appointed at-will director supported by classified fiscal and grants management professionals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rudy. So I'm just going to go ahead and begin with some questions, if I could. From your purchase, to what extent has GPD engaged the Regional Fusion Center operations since the center's creation through Public Law 35-133 in December of 2020, including the temporary or long-term assignment of GPD officers to the facility?
So presently, Senator, we do have a representative from the Guam Police Department, and it has been continuous. I've been with the Fusion Center, I want to say, for about 20 months. And that whole 20 months, I've had representation from the Guam Police Department. So they do embed an officer into our office. And it does, of course, it does help us with interactions with the Guam Police Department. So they are our liaison, so to speak, to handle all our correspondence with the Guam Police Department.
So what specific role does GPD serve with respect to coordinating the exchange of criminal intelligence, including known and potential threats to Guam and our neighboring communities of Micronesia, and what resources and support have been made available by the Office of Homeland Security, the Guam Office of Homeland Security, to the Guam Police Department to effectively investigate and bring bad actors to justice and ultimately preserve life and property?
So what I can tell you, Senator, is that GPD does reach out to the Fusion Center for certain investigations. So we do assist them with investigations. So how it is that they would contact our office and ask us if we can further look into a case, a lead, whatever it may be. So all analysts who are assigned in the Fusion Center would work on that. So if it's a case they're working, they would get the information and they would put together a package to send back to GPD to assist them with their investigation. So we don't initiate the investigation for GPD. They make the request. We take the request. We do our analytical investigative work on it, and then after it's completed, it's sent back to that agency. And that's how it is with a lot of agencies. So even Customs, if they ask, it goes to individual agencies when they make the request of the Fusion Center to assist them in whatever investigations that they may be undertaking.
And for the benefit of the committee and those who are following today's second public hearing on Bill 184, how does the current Homeland Security and Regional Fusion Center framework, including the appointment of unclassified personnel, ensure that the Marianas Regional Fusion Center activities remain free of political interference?
Well, I can tell you, Senator, in the 20 months I've been there, we've been able to run our office, run the Fusion Center, without any interference, and that's in the 20 months that I've been there. I've never been asked or never been called on to do. We do what we do, and we run the Fusion Center the way it's supposed to be run, without outside influence. What I can say is that the current analysts that we have, and I want to say half are fairly new, right? They just started their tenure into the Fusion Center, and we've had no incidents of that, either directly from me or within the analysts themselves.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Okay, I'll turn the mic over to my colleague, Senator Chris Duenas. Do you have any questions? You have 5 minutes, Senator Duenas.
Sidus Mazza, yes, I do. And thank you to Rudy and Ms. Lucy for showing up today and giving us their testimony on the markup version of the bill. Rudy, I think, and maybe both of you really, I think maybe for the listening public, Fusion Center, Marianas Fusion Center may just go over their head at this point. I know that there's been a certain amount of exposure to its formation and when it was enacted into law and the like, but just give a general discussion, and I'm sure media covers this, so give a general discussion once again, is what was the Enabling Act and what is the Marianas Fusion Center supposed to do?
From my understanding, Senator, it was incorporated in 2013, I believe, 2013, under then Governor Calvo, if I remember it correctly. So the MRFC, so if I can just state it this way, because you're right, a lot of people don't understand what the MRFC is, and in my tenure there, I've tried to build that capacity and that outreach, where we're now part of GVB, we're now part of GHRA, we've associated ourselves with Anderson OSI, we've had meetings with the AG, the US AG, and so on. But the MRFC is a locally owned law enforcement activity that is federally mandated to be a coordinating mechanism for intelligence sharing between federal, local law enforcement and public safety. So we are that entity that if everything was run the way it's supposed to, information would flow into the Fusion Center. We would take that information, we would vet that information, and then if it had to go out to whatever partner we have, then that information would go out to them. But that's how Fusion Centers work. Information in, then we can give the information out. But it's only as good as the information flows into the Fusion Center. And yes, in the past, there have been challenges. And even when I first took the position, there are challenges with information flowing in. But those are things that we have to build. Like in anything else, we have to build those relationships. We have to build that trust. And I can honestly say that we have come a long way in the last 20 months. So the Fusion Center is really making itself known to the public, and we do get more and more reports from the public. A lot of scams, a lot of things are being called into our office, which wasn't happening before. So that what Lucy alluded to, that see something, say something, that campaign really assists us in gathering information and then vetting that information and letting it go out to the agencies that need it in the end.
So Lucy, can you share just your, I'm the guy on the street, I just met you, and I said, hey, I heard about this Marianas Fusion Center. Can you tell me what's it about and what does it do?
So the Fusion Center, as we see it in layman's term, is basically, its true role is to get information, analyze it, fuse information together. So we take complicated statements, tips, and break it down so that layperson will know. So for example, Senator, you brought up Volt Typhoon, right? When Volt Typhoon first started, everybody's like, what the hell is a Volt Typhoon? We have Mawar, we have Pong Samoa, what do you guys do? So what Fusion Center does is they take the intel or information, make sure it's factual, and then they break it down and establish whether it's a high, a low, or medium threat, and work with partners such as telecommunication companies, such as critical infrastructure, to make sure that they know. And then also not just Volt Typhoon, but even cybersecurity scams, like the romantic scams, right? Or elderlies being taken advantage. So especially during the holidays, Fusion Center will do commercials, or during Cybersecurity Month, with Office of Technology, Office of the Governor, we'll go out and say, hey, this is a potential. If you get a phone call and somebody's asking you to please bail them out of jail, it's a scam. Or we give out information to families to be cognizant of their elderly parents, right? If you see your elderly parent just like giving out more money than usual, then call the Fusion Center so that they will be able to work with law enforcement, whether it be federal or local, and get the proper information out. So Fusion Centers are basically, you receive the information, we validate it, we analyze it, and we put out a statement, whether it's a high, medium, or low probability that this is a threat. And we give them tips on how to prevent. So one of the other things too that the Fusion Center is very active in, and that we report to back to our grantor, is active shooter trainings. The Fusion Center itself, members will go out to schools, to hotels and restaurants, anybody that requests, and do some active shooter training to teach not only the employees, but the students as to how to react, when to react. So there's many different things that they do.
So my experience during the time when I had a task of having to manage not only with the military buildup law enforcement directive in terms of what we would do for civilian military task force, I spoke to a number of individuals about this emergence of the Fusion Center. My understanding was one of the key coordinations was designed under the Fusion Center because of experiences on the national level in the early days, such as 9/11 and other emergencies such as that there was a notable miscommunication between federal and local law enforcement. So can you explain that a little bit? That's what I actually was made to understand was the fundamental responsibility.
So Fusion Centers, and you're correct, it came out of 9/11, right? Information, there was intel going around, one agency had information, didn't share it with the other agency, so Fusion Centers were created. An example is the Fusion Center has a software. And so when they get a request or they get information, they're able to input this information. And trying to think of a good scenario. So you had DOC here this morning, right? One of the things that DOC has challenges with, that I've heard, is cell phones with prisoners, right? So one of their rules or one of their laws, whatever they want to describe it as, is that prisoners are not supposed to have cell phones. So in the Fusion Center, if they received information or a request from the DOC director to go in and he's got data or intel that he's got cell phones, prisoners have cell phones and they're conducting nefarious activities, Utilizing the Fusion Center software, they can actually go in and look at areas and trends and report back and work with DOC director and the law enforcement side of the Fusion Center to make sure that if there wasn't a potential activity because of contraband, cell phones, that they will be able to work together and get that information out.
You shared that thought process, Rudy?
So the software she's referring to is called Caseware. And what that is, it's a building of information. So if we get reports or we get names or we get tips, everything goes into Caseware. So it's, if you can imagine, it's all information in this software, it's floating there. But with the concept of fusion centers, of how, even what Lucy was saying, how one agency would hold information, another would hold, and it didn't make a connection, this software will make that connection. So if there was a number that we were looking at and we inputted it, and somebody else previously input that number, then it would make that connection. And then it would give the analyst that, saying, oh, 6 months ago, this number popped up associated with this person, with this activity, and that's how the information is used to build case, right? And then whatever that comes of that, if it has to be directed to the Guam Police Department, then it will get to the Guam Police Department with the information that we have and everything that came about from that one link of a phone number.
So now we're talking about the current structure, which is Office of Civil Defense, Homeland Security. I guess my question would be, you seem to, and even from Civil Defense and Homeland Security's perspective, you seem to continue to allude that this is the proper home for this organization. I want to share this thought and just see why maybe this resistance, if you will, or non-buy-in might exist on this level. See, the concern I have is that I think when we talk about emergency response, Homeland Security, civil defense, generally we're talking about man-made natural disasters, and of course the law enforcement component. But as far as I'm concerned, I think the frontline leader with regard to public safety is Guam Police Department. And that's the way I see it. Have you had any interaction with other stateside partners where there's an embedded organization within their lead police department?
Yes, that's correct, Senator. So I reached out to the National Fusion Center, inquiring exactly of the 80 fusion centers, how many are embedded within a police department. And out of 80, the number came back to be about 64. Now, how it operates, and if it operates well, I'm not privy to that. All the information I received is that yes, they are embedded within those police departments. How they function, how effective they are, I don't have that information. So, but I can tell you that 64 out of 80 are there. What that means as far as effectiveness, I can't answer it.
So as I sit here and look at Lucy Perez, Rudy Gaza, individuals who have been serving in the government for decades, really, and you have a mission. I've seen at least Lucy, under different umbrellas, different operations, and be equally as effective across the board. Let's just put Rudy Gaza and Lucy Perez in the same position, operating under GPD. Tell me why you both think that that's not a fit.
What I can tell you, Senator, is that the personnel that we have in the Fusion Center are law enforcement officers, when they come into the Fusion Center, they become analysts. They're not law enforcement per se with the job that they do for us. So for example, we have that see something, say something. So we do have scams reported, a lot of romance scams, senior scams. When they make that initial call to us, and our analysts call and say, well, we need to meet with you, right? What I did find out, and what I found out even at my career at the Superior Court, when we meet with victims and we come out in our uniforms, there is a hesitancy on their part to divulge information. And I learned that early on in my career at the court, and I've seen it at the Fusion Center. So I've told the analysts, whenever we have victims come in, do not wear that law enforcement uniform, right? Because you're representing the MRFC. You have your MRFC wear that. So it brings down their apprehension to share information with us. Because I have seen it where when they see the uniform, they sort of don't want to speak to us anymore. Because for whatever reason, fear, whatever, I don't know what it is, but when we switch it and we just put on the MRFC shirt, there is none of that. So in that sense, I'm not sure how that would work with the Guam Police Department if they know that, oh, the Fusion Center now is with GPD. So the perception of the public, I mean, if nobody really knows what the Fusion Center does, they're going to think, oh, they're GPD. And in essence, we're not. And I mean, that's the best way that I can categorize that or explain that. Would it be a good fit for us? From where I sit right now, I don't think so.
So, pardon me, Lucy, and this might sound like a little bit of it's not a slight, but what I'm hearing right now on the mission and what a lot of the information coming up through the Fusion Center sounds a lot to me like consumer protection and some other stuff that maybe the AG's office deals with and things like that in terms of scams and the like. Now, certainly there are elements of, nefarious operations that purport to be something that are clearly a disguise for larger, operational misdeeds, if you will, I guess is the best that comes to my mind at this point. But I think I need you to expand a little bit more on that.
So, when I was assigned to the Fusion Center, and I explained this in the first iteration of the bill. So you go in, and even how your mindset is as to how law enforcement operates, how critical infrastructure operates, you go through a BITAC training, right? And it's a complete different mindset. You're taught how to analyze things. So another example, what we worked on in the Fusion Center was, remember there was a time when we had people going out and taking pictures of our critical infrastructure, right? Law enforcement was getting phone calls, GPD, Customs, hey, even up at the airport, we have this car there and this guy's been standing there taking pictures of the airfield, right? Law enforcement at that time had many other calls. So what the Fusion Center does is we would go out and actually not investigate, but take a look, find out the information. If we could take pictures, if they had if they had a license plate, then we would give that to our GPD analysts who would run it, and then they would go and do questioning, right? So that's another way of it. The way I see Fusion Center is we have, yes, as Rudy has stated, we have representatives not just from police, we have representatives from fire, we have representatives from agriculture, customs, airport, port, working in there. Our job was to take whatever information, whether it came regarding a critical infrastructure, people looking at water tanks, people looking at the airport, or whether it was in your mind, consumer information we provide information, we fuse information together so that it makes sense to people. Sometimes it's difficult, like you said. If people aren't aware of what a Marianas Regional Fusion Center is, they'll just think it's another club. But it's more than that. We actually also work with CNMI. Rudy has a node there. He has people over there. So how they work together in that concept, the Chinese immigrants, boat riders, the illegal, right? So if Saipan sends a message up to Rudy, hey Guam, we're seeing this activity over there. You may want to look into it. The Fusion Center takes that information, and with their intel analysts, will actually work together with agriculture, with GPD, GFD, and sometimes even the Coast Guard. They'll monitor. They'll make sure that the information that they're getting is factual, and hopefully they work together so that if there is that quote-unquote illegal entry, we would be prepared. We would know how to handle it.
Share with me whether or not there has been any experiences or any issues with your operational grants included with the current situation with the defunct operations of OCD, Homeland Security, in terms of the general fund now subsidizing it due to locked out of funding.
So Fusion Center grants, so Fusion Center is under OHS. It is not under Office of Civil Defense. That grant is under Homeland Security Grant Program, not under the EMPG grant. And to just give you an idea, we applied for FY25 for the Homeland Security Grant. We provided some investment justifications, and we were awarded $2.75 million for FY25. And it was actually an increase from 1.8. So it did not stop us. FEMA, DHS didn't say, hey, you can't get the grant because of what's going on. But what it did, what the audit did, and what I recommended earlier, is we took a look at it. We said, okay, we have this audit that came out, both from the OPA and from DHS. We have a plan on how to correct, a corrective action plan. In that grant itself for the HSGP, we wrote in that, and they approved that we were going to hire an external auditor to ensure that not only this grant, this future grant, but the grants that we have to close out are done properly. We also went in and did some training, and that's also part of the grant, working through the Homeland Security Grant Program. We worked through our grantor, Mr. Mitchell. We worked together with FEMA, and we brought it up. We brought it up months in advance, and we said, you know what would be good? Instead of sending people out to the training center, send your instructors over, or let's do a virtual class. And we not only expanded it or kept it for the people in OCD, OHS, but we opened it up to other agencies, because federal grants training was something that we saw across the board. So a positive to that is now we have people who are trained. We'd like to offer another training up so we can get other agencies. But most importantly, if there was another disaster, you have people who have already been trained and should know what documents are needed, what to look for, and what is authorized and unauthorized.
So my takeaway, Mr. Chair, is it sounds to me like the resistance is structurally, because it sounds to me like what you're saying really is you're already operating somewhat independent, regardless of what umbrella you're under. So I think that's what the committee is going to have to work on and look a little bit more into the testimony, because the testimony to me is twofold. It says basically that, well, some of the responses in here are not necessarily attributable to, and we'll have to refine this a little bit, attributable to the audit findings. Yes. The next is that, there's a difference between whether or not there's a belief here of classified versus unclassified in terms of, it doesn't I don't see the situation being where it's housed. I don't even see a resistance necessarily to GPD. I see the issue of whether or not structurally, and this is a policy call, right? So I think, we continue to take the testimony, work on it a little bit, but I say that, to me, in my humblest of opinions, I don't think the home is the issue. I think the issue is reform and change structurally, and I think that's where we're going to have to come down on whether we, just respectfully disagree, just like the representatives in front of us that have come twice now, and others who have written, such as Homeland Security and Civil Defense, in terms of their resistance or outright opposition. But that's what I'm walking away with, and that's what the committee is going to have to make a decision on. What's the policy call? Because I think in the end of the day, obviously there's always going to be a need for more exposure on what this critical operation could do and the benefits it could bring to our people. Because like I said, my internal knowledge and study on this and real-time, application, as like I said, having that overall lead position in the Camacho administration of public safety, and bringing all the entities together for one mission, which was to respond to the buildup. I have an integral knowledge of all the operations of everyone and what they do and how it cross-communicates. But, I can say that, to me, I think you would operate regardless. But I think that the policy decision here is that the front line of enforcement and the front line of I'm not saying Civil Defense and Homeland Security is not a professional organization, but under the law enforcement umbrella, and that's another call, Rudy, where we're going to have to make a decision as per the committee, whether or not that appearance, and I think we'll do a little bit more research nationally as well. But I see the fundamental resistance really is the structural change and the home, but I think that's where we're going to come down on it. I got to say, I sympathize with your testimony. I'm not compelled at this point, but I certainly understand, the work you've put in and your, protection, if you will, of what's currently underway. So the committee's got work to do, and we thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you so
Mr.
much.
Chair, can I just, for the record, humbly request that we get together and when we discuss this before you put out your final bill after you've received all testimony, so that we can show you, and sometimes just being across from each other, it strikes up the conversation and the ideas. And as a good senator has said, we can respectfully agree to disagree, but at least we will have everyone around the table and hear the thoughts and go through and understand what it is, what the intentions are, and give us time. It may be, you come back and you say, no, Lizzie, still don't buy it. It's a law enforcement activity. Or maybe it comes back to a decision of, okay, let's sit down and talk. If you do this, we can do this. We'll give you this time frame. We'll say 18 months or 12 months or 6 months, right? But we at least sit down all together and not individually as agencies and just discuss it.
Just one more thing, Mr. Chair, just real quick, because as you say that, and as you say that you were successful in your grant application, have you sent your corrective actions to the OPA and a response formally?
The OPA has been involved in all the meetings that we've had, and I know, well, if memory serves me correct, but I will verify that our corrective action plan was submitted over to FEMA and that we were awaiting feedback on it. But I will verify, because I've seen many documents, but I do know that a CAP plan was submitted because I'm part of the committee. We had to do policies, we had to, timesheets, all that good stuff. And it was pending approval from DHS FEMA, but it had everything on it. But I will verify.
I asked that, Mr. Chair, because as the oversight for the Office of Public Accountability, I really want to make sure that the comments, which I take on its full veracity, that are in your testimony in terms of your dispute with the findings, or maybe thinking that the findings can be addressed, I want to make sure that there's also buy-in. And I also want to make sure that the representation of what the OPA's observance is accurately portrayed here. I'm not making aspersions, but I'm saying in order for us to continue that communication that you've asked for, Lucy, I think that there's also has to be a vetting with regard to the response from the OPA saying, we've seen your corrective actions and we either concur or still have concerns.
Thank you, Senator. And I just want to assure you that based on your lead, you can expect that in the start of the new year, and let this be a clarion call to all the members of the committee, to all the agencies, that to include Guam Homeland Security and Civil Defense, that we will be doing oversight hearings starting in January, and this might be the very first issue, will be the corrective action plan. We started the term with it. It makes perfect sense to go back to it in January.
And just one thing, if I may say, Senator Gumataotao, I know that fusion centers, the understanding of what a fusion center is in the public, it's still, there's still misinformation. But as we sit here, I would like, you, Senator Gumataotao, if you would meet with us at the Fusion Center, come meet, myself and my analysts, and we can have this sit down and conversation and see where the gaps are that you see or that you may have in how the Fusion Center is run or how it's structured, and we can sit and we can talk about it, and hopefully we can come to a better understanding of what you're looking for and what we do as a Fusion Center.
No, thank you for that. And just so you know that the expectations, Rudy, have everything to do with the expectations that the people of Guam have for critical law enforcement agencies and assets, to include the Marianas Regional Fusion Center. Hence, the policy is always meant to look at that and that alone. It has nothing to do with my role per se singularly. It has everything to do, much greater impetus has to do with ensuring that the people of Guam and the people of Micronesia are in fact safe, and especially with the role that they would have from a law enforcement point of view. And I appreciate the input, and I will definitely take the comments under advisement, and again, to go back to our government operations chair and really at his lead, you can expect that we will be back here for an oversight hearing, and I think that the questions will be a little bit more pointed and with definitive answers. It's a little bit different here in this public hearing process for a bill, but I can assure you that it'll be different in oversight. With that said, I want to thank you all for participating in today's public hearing on Bill number 184-38, including the draft committee amendments. And if I can, let me renew my challenge today, not so much to Senator Duenas, but those that are not in attendance or may have left the hearing since it started or not a member of the Committee on Public Safety, Emergency Management, and the National Guard. I ask my colleagues to provide input in the coming days as outlined in our rules back to this committee. I would encourage my colleagues to send an email to my office with input and recommended changes to make Bill 184-38 better, as many of you have mentioned time and time again on the floor, in the sessions over the course of 2025, with other policies we have addressed since the start of this term. For the record, ideas to change any part of a particular bill works in our process here in the Guam legislature, and my colleagues, I say that your thoughts that you are even against it work too. Let our voters and our citizens alike be the judge of the level of contribution we as colleagues can bring to Bill 184-38, and I thank them, the senators, in advance for their support of the markup process of Bill 148-38. That's our job. That is what we are elected to do here in the Guam legislature. This bill is part of the Committee of Public Safety, Emergency Management, and your Guam National Guard's commitment to safeguarding federal and local taxpayer investments that are made in support of a more responsive and sustainable emergency management infrastructure moving forward. Building on the work and discussion put forward prior to and during the October 14, 2025 public hearing on Bill 184, the feedback that we receive through today's conversation will surely help to ensure that Guam is in a position to responsibly administer federal grants for Homeland Security services. We also want to be sure that law enforcement is supported by an active law enforcement professional that can see the reality of what our men and women of public safety see each and every day in their discharge of their duties on island. This bill, including its draft committee amendments, I believe will strengthen our collective ability to detect, prepare for, prevent, protect against, respond to, and recover from known and developing threats against our families, especially at a time of rising tensions in the Indo-Pacific region. So I want to thank you all very much for that. The Committee on Public Safety, Emergency Management, and Guam National Guard appreciates the attendance. Again, including the amendments, the committee will review the information received during today's public hearing and communicate further with relevant government and non-government entities if necessary. A markup meeting on Bill 184-38 COR, including the draft committee amendments, will be scheduled after the window to accept written testimonies when on the bills close. That would be, the committee will then continue to receive written testimony on the bill, including the draft committee amendments, during the next 5 business days or until Wednesday, December 24th, 2025. Testimony may be submitted via email to my office at office.senator.shawn@guamlegislature.gov, through the legislature mailroom here at the Guam Congress Building, or they may be delivered directly to my senatorial office here in Aganya, just up the road at the ASC Trust Building. With that said, today's oversight hearing on DOC facilities and the public hearing on Bill number 184-38 COR, including draft committee amendments, is hereby adjourned. The time is now 2:56 tomorrow Standard Time. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you.